So it's me and Alex. And I'm going to start off with a story. And it's a story that integrates Minnesota, specifically Minneapolis, design and music. And you can't talk about Minneapolis design unless you talk about Joe Duffy and the Duffys, who opened the conference this year. And you can't talk about music in Minnesota unless you talk about somebody else. So Joe made the mistake of hiring me when I was about 29, moved me to Minneapolis. And about a year into our relationship, Joe said, we got a phone call from a musician. I want you to go out and meet him. And it was a musician, and it was a place called Paisley Park. And we went out and we met Prince. And there was a project that he was doing for the Diamonds and Pearls tour, 1991. And the Duffy Design Group had been invited to create a key part of that project. And so we went out to meet Prince. And we got there very early in the morning. Our meeting was at 9 o'clock. I wanted to be there early. We got there about 8:30. And we were standing in the lobby at Paisley Park, and about 8 musicians tumble out of a recording studio, and they're like, exhausted. They had their music cases, and they walked toward the parking lot. And then somebody else, Prince, walks out. He walks back into the building. And I said, wow. I said, they must have been here early. And I said this to Prince's assistant, who came and got me about 5 minutes later. She said, oh, no, they weren't here early. Prince had an idea at about 9 o'clock last night. They're just finishing up. He had kept them through the night because Prince had an idea, and they worked through the night. And that blew me away. Talk about dedication. But I had not met anyone as passionate about music or dedicated to music or insane about music or finding ways to create new ways to connect with music until I met my friends at Spotify.
So I'm going to tell a little story about Spotify. And I always love to tell a story about Daniel Ek, who's our founder. Because for me, he is the most authentic embodiment of what is important to Spotify and why Spotify exists. Daniel was 24 years old. He was a lifelong musician, and he was a tech billionaire. He didn't have to do anything, again, really, for the rest of his life, if he didn't want to. But he actually was extremely passionate about 2 things, which were technology and music. And he also was of the era where he had grown up and spent his college years and his early working years surrounded by piracy and an industry that was flailing, and an industry that was on its way down. So he knew that he sort of was uniquely poised to actually change this industry. And so he invented streaming music, and he launched Spotify 11 years ago at 24 years old. And he did that not in Silicon Valley, but in Stockholm, Sweden, which is also an interesting point for what we're going to ultimately end up sharing with you guys, which is, our point of view on design. And I think, it's hard to talk about the city of Stockholm and not talk about design and sort of the design capitals of the world. But Spotify, when it launched 11 years ago, and even 5 years ago, even 4 years ago, wasn't a company that was built around design the way that it should have been. And hopefully we've done some work to sort of evolve that. To set a little bit of the climate when we first engaged in this project together about 3 years ago, these were the stars, and this is the artwork that we had to work with when we wanted to communicate about music. This is what our product looked like, and this is actually version 2.0 of our product.
Nice.
Really sexy. And this is, 11 years ago, okay, so not 3 years ago, 11 years ago, the identity that we launched with in Stockholm. It was a color green that actually, the reason why we were this color green was an arbitrary decision by Daniel and the other leadership who were like, hey, there's no other brand that has this green, we'll just be green. Let's have a typeface that we use. It was Proxima Nova. And let's have this quirky little, sort of like internet-inspired logo. Now, 3 years ago, when we started this project with Collins, this is what we looked like. We were one of those brands that sort of made the mistake of like, hey, we'll just use lifestyle imagery of the people that we want to be using our product. Ultimately, if you kind of swapped out, I always like to say this, if you swapped out the Spotify logo, put the Converse logo on there, you would have a Converse ad. There was nothing about this that said music. There was nothing about this that was differentiating for Spotify, that spoke to streaming music, that spoke to the passion that our organization had. There's a lot of work to be done. We also had a lot of tone of voice that tied itself to more hard-hitting sort of functional messaging. So we had no, and when I say no, I mean absolutely zero emotional connection to our audiences. It was ultimately, we were delivering something that is so emotional, music. And we were with them, 6+ hours a day in their pocket, but at the end of the day, we were looking like a really cold tech company. And we had no real connection to what it was that people were passionate about and the reason why people used our product.
Alex, can I talk about this?
Yeah.
So this was a branding solution that was created by an advertising agency. Advertising agencies their power tends to sit around making film, television commercials. They really want to, the power in an advertising agency tends to sit with creative directors who know how to make film. And so what ends up happening is the stuff that is not film, that is not stuff that can win something it can, tends to be ignored. And so the design team, often in advertising agencies, are reduced to making things that are simple, easy, so they can execute a lot of stuff very fast. And so a traditional advertising agency will say, what's our brand color, what's our typeface, and then execute a bunch of stuff. And that is an often limiting role within the way that advertising agencies often see design. They see it as custodial, they see it as organizing, they see it as matching luggage, they want to make everything look the same, and the conversation had moved on. I can see why this makes sense in terms of efficiency. It didn't make sense in terms of building a brand that was about the magic and the delight of music.
Yeah, exactly. And so we came to Collins. We started our agency search, and the challenge to Collins was ultimately how can we create a flexible yet coherent brand visual identity system that allows us to transform from what people think of as an app, right? An app on a phone to what we aspire to be, which is a leading global music company and a leading global music brand. And so that was the challenge that we posed to Collins and Brian. I believe I'm passing this to you. Oh, sorry. Two more builds. And the other sort of like sub-challenge within that challenge is that we're a place that has to communicate to a lot of different audiences in a ton of different environments. We need whatever language we develop to translate in digital media. We need it to translate in the app itself. We need to translate across all of our communications, but also in the physical and live music performance spaces, in brand environments. We need it to be something that a variety of people can use, and it still feels consistent and coherent. So yes, we have an internal creative team that needs to leverage all of this, and that's, takes shape in several different ways. So our internal creative group that works on communications and PR, and our internal creative team that develops the product and designs the product itself. But also agencies, right? We use a number of agencies. Right now, we're in 62 different markets globally. So that work doesn't all come from one agency. And last but not least, partnerships. Partnerships are really true to how we've been able to extend the scale and reach of our brand. When we initially launched in the US, we launched with a really tight partnership with Facebook, which is how most people signed up and found out about Spotify. So how can we leverage all of these really important and strategic global partnerships that we have and work with an identity that allows us to marry ourselves with them in a way that feels organic and beautiful? Now it's you.
Yeah. So you have to take all that. It's kind of difficult to be up here because every case study that came before me, I really admire. Tasha, I admire the work. Bobby, I admire the work that you guys and the stuff that RGA did is remarkable. What we try to do here is try to find an idea that's single-minded. And it has to work. What we did, we have to work across communications, products, and environments. So we have to create a system that works across all of that. And it has to flex, and it has to be coordinated. Sometimes it's in the stores, sometimes it's a TV commercial, sometimes it's an experience, sometimes an app. We had to create something that worked across everything. We had to find an idea that sat at the heart of that. And my partner at the time, Lena Maschmeyer, found this video online, which you might have heard. And what we realized is music is a natural pharmaceutical. It either makes you feel more about what you feel, like when I get blue, I play a really bad song. And if I'm really tired of being blue, then I put on, don't tell anybody, I put on ABBA. Surprise. So what ends up happening is music can either make you feel stronger or it can change your state. And we saw this video. If you haven't seen it, it's fantastic. Let's break. Oh yeah, she's in. Yeah. Go. So we saw that. And that bursts with emotion. I mean, if you feel like your favorite song that you heard, or the song that you was playing when you met someone you're going to fall in love with, or the song that you played when you got your first promotion, the song you heard when you saw your child for the first time, that fills you with emotion. This don't fill nobody with emotion. That's an engineering culture. It's trying to do its best, but it's an engineering culture that is what bad advertising agencies do. Is they take a picture of the marketplace, and they take a picture of the consumer, and they hold a mirror up to it, and they put a headline on it. They say, let's show our market. See, we're just like you. Fortunately, this is not Spotify's view of the world. That was a mirror. And so what we had said was, music looks like this. We have a library in New York of about 2,500 volumes of history, design, art, architecture, philosophy, mythology. And all our projects start in the library. And we went back and we looked through the history of a design firm called Hypnosis, the work of Roger Dean, all the work that goes back back to the 1960s, the 70s. This is sheet music from the 1920s. These are evocative. You cannot separate the history of music from the history of art, design, illustration, and photography. This is the visual allegory or connection to music. So you need to live in this space and not look like an engineering company. The first thing we did was, and this drove people insane 3 years ago, we said, okay, maybe you should be, and it's not really coming out here, we just shifted the color green to be a little bit more vivid. This is our first step to see what would happen, and people went insane. So we decided to make it a little bit more vivid. I'm like, okay, people are paying attention, and they care. So that's interesting. So they got engaged. So we said, okay, you can't just be black and green. You need to be other colors. And so we introduced 34 other colors, and we said these are the only colors that Spotify can use. This is it. No other color except for black and white. That's it. And then everything you're going to see comes out of this color palette. And we changed it. You can do gradations of it, but basically that's it. So the other puzzle that Spotify had, and still does to some degree, but not as much now, was the idea that we get the same images that everybody else gets. We get the same images that Beats get. We get the same images that any other marketing venue or platform gets. So the puzzle with that is if you just take these images and put a logo in the right-hand side or corner, it's not the Spotify version. So we had to find, how do we create these images so whenever you touch these performers, it's the Spotify version that brings it to you. So the Spotify brand is always connected to these musicians. The other thing, we also recognize that brands can't just communicate. They have to support the communities in which they're a part of. So how to behave in a supportive way of not just people who love music, but also music culture and musicians. So one of the things that we did was a member of my team, Ben Crick, who led this work, looked at the idea of color coming back, and he started looking at duotones. And I saw him doing some experiments, and they were amazing. Because we keep the color palette limited, it could be beautiful and yet varied. And so, because I'm old and because I have a library, I went into the library and I brought these pictures out for Ben. And I said, you know who else solved this problem in the 1960s and early 70s? A nightclub in San Francisco that basically invented psychedelica, the Fillmore West. Now, the interesting thing about the Fillmore West is if you saw a poster for Jimi Hendrix that was designed like that, two things happened. One, you knew Jimi Hendrix, and two, you knew exactly where he was going to be playing. So what happens is design language became unique, and it became a very powerful force, not only in San Francisco, but eventually psychedelica sort of rolls across the country. But it was started and primarily driven by this club called the Fillmore West in San Francisco. And we started looking at how they used insane amounts of color, because you always knew two things: who the performer was and where you could see them. And that was a good metaphor for us in the work that we want to do for Spotify, because you always want to see the performer, but you also want to know, where do I see that? I see it on Spotify. And so we started doing experiments that Ben Crick led on our team that kind of looked at sort of iconic imagery across time. These are the early experiments we were looking at. Can we create this language? Now, this is 3 years ago now. Since then, if you put in the word duotone in Google, all the stuff that will come up will be Spotify images. It's really annoying. So what happened was we then took that and then started to do other experiments and started to look at it. And what happened when you took one image and you did it through different kinds of filters, we can get different kinds of emotional charges based on the color combination that you did. And these are all duotones. Then the other thing is, remember that little baby, how she had this burst of emotion? What we decided to have, in addition to the color, we decided to say, hey, let's create bursts. Let's create something that's visual and expressive and dynamic. And so the team went off and created the idea of play. And we looked at these sort of design elements that these are Lego pieces, and stop. And these were elements that we started to build. We have about 50 different elements of play, and stop. And record. So then they all started to come together. Then we started to take a look at, okay, this is how it starts to sort of evolve. Now at the time, the Spotify logo had already been changed. We didn't do it. I wanted to change it because it reminded me of a bit of a Wi-Fi symbol. We started to tweak it a little bit, and then we got a phone call from someone that said, if you touch that logo again, we will not call you back. So he said, what logo? What? Yeah. Don't touch it. I had to
fight a lot of battles for that one.
Yeah, don't touch it. But we could just, it looks like it. Nope. Nope. Do you want to continue working with us? Yes, we will never touch that logo again. But what we liked about 3 years ago, we really liked the typeface. And we said, okay, what we tried to do is just have it be one color. And it was, by this point, it had been highly recognized. So then we started putting things together with these bursts and duotones. Started to look at typography. I'll tell you about that in just a second. And what starts to happen when you use this language? By basically taking existing photographs and putting, either duotones or graphics on top of it, so it become expressive. And then we introduced a typeface called Circular, which is a beautiful typeface, partly inspired by Spotify, the Spotify typeface itself. And then we started to play with experiments, and posteriors and other kind of experiments that we did. And the thing about this is it has to go from country western to house, to jazz, to hip hop, to Madonna, to Michael. If you're in China, he's called Michael Bubble, by the way. So Michael Bublé. And so it had to be expressive. And the other thing that's really important is, and Alice can talk a little bit about this.
I mean, one of the things that we ultimately loved about the system is you saw, the early work that we did where we kind of threw type over some mediocre lifestyle photography, right? And that was like the way that we had to communicate. And we're a tech company that's constantly evolving and putting communications into the world like on a daily basis. So we have to crank things out quickly. And this solved a major problem for us, which is we can actually create art and communications without any assets at all. So we can get the same shared assets from a label that an Apple Music might get and make that Spotify. Or we can choose to actually just communicate from Spotify to our audience in a way that feels musical and engaging with a hard-hitting message by creating bursts, using the color palette that we have and using Circular as a typeface. So it gave us a lot of flexibility in being able to build assets from nothing, really, which was very useful.
One of the things that we do when we take on complex systems like this, we say, what's the most difficult thing that everybody hates doing that no one cares about? Not the big opening of the event in Cannes or something on Sunset Boulevard in Los Angeles or even in Times Square. What's the thing that drives you insane? And if we can design our system to be the thing that everybody hates doing, then it'll work, because it has to scale across the smallest expression as well as the most vivid, including Alex's business card. Oh, look, printing, analog. And then stuff that we didn't do. And then part of the stuff when we start to send the system out is the different design teams around the world started making stuff. This stuff started to come back, and it was insane. We really liked it, particularly because if you can't get a photograph or you can't get something, all of a sudden you have a design language, and you have other components and other muscles you can sort of lift. Now the puzzle with this is that doing this kind of work with color and typography and shapes and forms takes a lot of work. And we wanted to create something that was in terms of design and imagery, unfuck-upable. One of the things that we did was we recognized that there was an extraordinary amount of time being spent in crafting a lot of this work. And so what our team created was a software program called the Spotify Colorizer. And say you get an image from Warner Brothers or Universal Music or Sony, and it comes to you, and it drops in this image. Because what we didn't want people to do is we didn't want you to go into any of the software programs. We wanted you to control the system you were working in. So you get a system, it'll automatically, you can create it using the color system, you can adjust it, and this is literally, you cannot mess this up. If you want to do a randomizer, you can press a button and the randomizer will create something for you. Secretly, the randomizer is 50 of Ben Crick's favorite color combinations. Don't tell anybody. But that's what you get. And then what ended up happening is this reduced the amount of production time on an average piece of communication from 2 days to about 4.5 hours. Because all of a sudden people have a software program, they don't have to go into InDesign, they don't have to go into Photoshop, everything is done here. And that was a tool that we allowed, that we surfaced, and it went to the advertising agencies, the design firms that used internationally, and it was used in-house to get the brand coordinated and get it up and running. Because we wanted to have that kind of diversity. We didn't want to go back to the black and the green. So then we did a fairly comprehensive guideline that I'm not going to bring you through. And then we also created a poster that anyone who touches the brand gets this poster. It has these are all the Lego pieces that you use. It was very strange to see these posters in Instagram feeds in people's homes in Stockholm. They took pictures of it. They should have kept it but anyway. But people like this. It was a tool. The problem with brand identity guidelines, particularly the ones that are as robust as this, is they can be confusing because they're so big. This is the handle to the suitcase. So it was a summation that all the designers and creative people could have in their office. This is how we launched the event. When you have to launch an identity system, it needs to be connected to a new product idea. So we did that with Daniel Eck, and we launched this. So it started to play out in environments. It was sort of super visually magnetic in there as well. Now, I love this. This is one of the first headlines we did. I'm sorry, not sorry, Williamsburg, but Bieber's hit trended highest in your neighborhood. So
yeah, what's interesting about this one is, I think 3 years ago when we started this project, it was really the first foundational brand building asset that we created, right? We had this amazing design language, and the second we built that out and we saw the sustainability associated with that and how we were able to have scale globally in looking and feeling consistent as a brand, that sort of inspired us to get our shit together, for lack of a better term. So it ultimately set off explorations around what's our brand tone of voice and what are the types of things that we do and what is Spotify known for. This was one of the first campaigns where we started data storytelling in a way that felt really connected to our audiences in regions that were in neighborhoods that were relevant for them. And just sort of silly and having fun with our audience. And you'll see that there's years now worth of work that came from this place.
Yeah, and teasing all my creative staff, all of whom live in Williamsburg. And then some evolution to the work. This is our launch for how do we take this and accommodate it for Japan. And so this is how we're sort of evolving the work. I think we can be constant because we're using the bursts, and we're starting to take the color palette we had and start to add some other sort of systems to it. And it just becomes a sort of a vivid thing. Now, here's where we brought something back.
Yeah. So initially, the guidelines did include green. We had refreshed the green, but we were being really protective over the use of that green. So the green was to be used solely by itself. And then when we used color, we used every other color. We kept green, sort of the sacred brand color. What we found as we started launching more and more cities globally is that actually there was equity in green as representing Spotify, and that a lot of the regions who had been waiting with bated breath for us to launch sort of missed and didn't recognize Spotify when we didn't use the green, we didn't leverage the green. So it was a good story and tale in sort of the evolution of the identity. So we basically did what we call Viz 2.1, Viz 2.0 tech company, was the version we just did with Brian 3 years ago. And then 2.1 was what we rolled out with our Japan launch, which was last spring. Yeah. And it allowed us to actually have a new set of guidelines when we're rolling out our brand in new sort of uncharted territories.
Now, the interesting thing for us is the ability then to leverage color in a really profound but very disciplined way, instead of just the old language they had, lets us do some really interesting things.
So I think next up, I'm just going to show you guys just a very, very recent, just some images. So we launched Rap Caviar, which is a playlist property of ours, the biggest playlist on Spotify. It has, I think, God, it's growing so rapidly that my number's going to be old, but over 8 million people that listen to it every day. We brought it into the live music space. And so for us to be able to see for the first time what this identity looks like when brought and associated with something that is so inherent to music culture, live music experiences, has been really fun to watch. And this tour is actually live right now. These are from Atlanta, which was our kickoff in August. We've got Chicago next week. So again, like sort of a bulletproof system that allows us to extend. We developed it 3 years ago, and it's only getting greater with time.
So it's duotone lighting. Trust me, it's not easy.
Duotone and typeface. So yeah, as you can see, I mean, this is where we were, and now this is where we are. And it feels and looks a lot more like music, which is our currency, which is the reason why we exist. One last thing that I'll leave you with is, ultimately this system, and when you're a brand that has a flexible and dynamic visual identity system, it opens up a world of creative opportunity for you. And I think our internal team really felt that and experienced it last February when we had an opportunity that was a super last minute opportunity that came up where we were able to really quickly pivot and pull together a campaign around yours truly. And I will actually, if you'll play the video, just show you guys the case study. We'll close on that.
I've been told I only have time for one question, but
That's
I
fine.
think it's a good question. I think that this is an important question. Congratulations on really spectacular work. You alluded to this earlier in the presentation when you tweaked the green, the reaction.
Oh, yeah.
And you were slaughtered for
Yeah.
changing the green.
Yeah.
And I often say
Internally
now,
and externally.
internally and externally, so we knew about the external part. And I often joke now that the only people that really like and are excited by brand design changes are brand designers. You know, most people don't look at things and go, woohoo, change.
I said to somebody when they were upset about a recent project we did, like, how could you do that? How could you possibly do that? And they were furious. And I said, you know what? Wait until you find out who the President of the United States is. Then you could shoot. Anyway,
And
get some perspective.
Airbnb had the same issue when we saw that a few days ago, where that change just ripples through culture with the most egregious and heinous comments and response.
Yeah.
And then ultimately things sort of calm down and the dust settles, and then if you happen to make any other tweaks a year, 18 months into the future, people are again horrified because you've tweaked the brand that they have grown to love.
Yeah.
And Brian, you've been involved in these types of cultural responses many, many times, and you're currently in the middle of one. Mm-hmm. So how do you stay true to your journey? How do you hunker down and say, you know what, we are going to weather this. We're not going to change the package back. We're not going to go back to our old logo to appease the haters. How do you stand firm?
You know, it's tough. I have like two things to say, and then I'll let you take it. I think internally, it was actually an even bigger challenge.
In what way?
I'll explain. This is like the most Spotify story ever. But essentially, we had spent months and months and months, almost a year working towards getting the new identity accepted. And this was like, so it's a Swedish culture, so it's socialization, socialization, socialization. Lots of trips around the world to share this work, and we finally had our new logo in the new green updated on the internal systems, which meant that our email and all of when you logged into the internal systems at Spotify, all of the logos changed. Well, the day that that happened, we were all up on our little like brand design space, high-fiving, like it finally happened, this is real, it's happening. And about 2 hours later, on one of the Slack channels, an engineer had figured out how to hack the Gmail account so that you could actually, and published this hack to get the logo back to the original logo. And so the internal conversation was, how do we hack our Gmail back to get the logo the way that it originally was, after damn near a year's worth of design work. So there was a lot of challenges associated with it there. We started sort of like Twittergate. I mean, it was like the conversation on Twitter the day that we changed the green in the app was ridiculous. But we decided, again, we're a brand that likes to sort of experiment and learn, right? And we wouldn't know until we started like moving forward and actually putting real communication and real work out in the market. We poked a little bit of fun on that one, actually, and we like, actually went to media and we launched an article that was about all of the various different types of green that we could have gone towards, so Kermit green versus dollar bill green, and we kind of like poked fun at the whole what we now coined Green Gate, which luckily is behind us, and now we're launching in markets who are asking us for the green, please, like we need the green. So full circle, having faith, having trust, again, in your partners, and holding true. And while engineers at the company were really upset about it, there's certain product things I'm upset about too, but that's their area of expertise, and this is ours. So a lot of those conversations and kind of warming people up to it and building trust. But you know what? This project was my first project at Spotify and built me all of the credibility I have now because people now see the work that comes out of it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Alex Tanguay, Brian Collins, Spotify.